It's very exciting, the people who are coming through here, that today when someone visits Israel, someone wants to understand this country, among the most significant tourist sites that they're going to go to is the Western Wall, Masada, and the City of David. And what we're going to try and understand in the 90 minutes or so that we have with each other this morning is what's happened over the last decade that has made this a place that people who want to understand Jerusalem, historically, religiously, politically, that they come now to the City of David. Who would have thought, where is the ancient, original city of Jerusalem? The city synonymous with King David, King Solomon, prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah. There would have been one answer. And the answer would not have been where we're standing right now. The answer would have been what we have over here, the old city of Jerusalem, surrounded by the iconic old city walls, which are only about 450 years old. The Magnificent during the Ottoman period. Now if you're coming from the US, 450 years sounds like, wow, that's pretty old. Jerusalem is about 4,000 years old, so we don't get that excited about 450-year-old walls. But in any case, everyone believes that is Jerusalem. Until the year 1867. 1867, Queen Victoria of England, she wants to discover the treasures of the Bible. The Ark of the Covenant, for instance. And if you want to find the treasures of the Bible, you'll go to the Holy Land. So she sends a man by the name of Captain Charles Warren here to the Holy Land. And if you're going to search in the Holy Land for the treasures of the Bible, you'll come to Jerusalem. And if you're going to go to one place in Jerusalem to search for the treasures of the Bible, where will you go? Not to where we're standing right now, but to what is directly in front of us over here to the north, the Temple Mount. So in 1867, Charles Warren comes to the Temple Mount. Here you see the great dome of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the number 3 holy site according to Islam. Behind the Al-Aqsa Mosque, you can look over here. We're standing on the roof of this building right over here. Here's Al-Aqsa. Here is the Golden Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock is a spot where, according to Muslim tradition, Muhammad goes on his night journey, learns the tradition of Muslim prayer. According to biblical tradition, when you speak of the Dome of the Rock that's being referred to is what's known as the foundation stone, the center of creation. It's that spot where, according to the biblical tradition, the binding of Isaac takes place. That's the spot where David's son Solomon will build the temple, hence the name Temple Mount. That's the site of Mount Moriah. The temple stands for over 4 centuries, destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 before the Common Era, rebuilt 70 years later, and then destroyed by the Romans in the year 70. All of that's happening on the Temple Mount. Charles Warren comes to the Temple Mount in 1867 and says, this is the spot where I want to search for the treasures of the Bible. Except, in 1867, the Ottomans are here, the Muslims are here, and they say, Charles, we're sure you are a great guy, but you are not going to dig up the Temple Mount. And to this day, there has been virtually no archaeological activity on the Temple Mount. There have been some other things less pleasant, which maybe we'll get into, but no archaeology for religious sensitivities, political sensitivities. And so now Charles Warren, he has a problem. He can go back to England, go back to Queen Victoria and say, well, I came to the Holy Land, and I went to Jerusalem, and I ascended the Temple Mount, but they didn't let me dig, so I came home. But he figures it's not going to go over well. So he says, if I can't excavate on the Temple Mount, I'll do the next best thing, which is to excavate near the Temple Mount. So he comes down the slopes of Mount Moriah, walks down through the valley beneath us over here to the east, and he comes across this ancient spring, known as the Gihon Spring. This spring is still flowing today. It's the water tunnel that you were considering maybe walking through. It's flowing from today back some thousands and thousands of years. And Charles Warren is curious, where does this water flow? It's flowing through a man-made tunnel, a tunnel dating back some 2,700 years. And he's curious, well, where does this tunnel lead? So he begins to walk through the tunnel carrying a torch. And as he walks through this tunnel, at a certain point, the flame of the torch begins to flicker wildly. He looks above his head and he sees there is a shaft going up into the mountain. Where does the shaft lead? He climbs up the shaft and he finds himself amidst a network of tunnels and fortifications with antiquities dating back thousands of years. And he says, hold on. Everybody believes that the original city of Jerusalem, the biblical city of Jerusalem, is located inside the walls of the old city. Charles Warren says, I believe that everybody is wrong. That Jerusalem is not located inside the walls of the old city, but is in fact located outside the walls of the old city. The question is why? Charles Warren has 2 ideas to support his theory. Number 1, urban planning. Imagine 4,000 years ago when Jerusalem is first established as a Canaanite city, and you want to live in this area. What's the number 1 thing you're going to look for? You want to live somewhere. Water, right? Not education, not employment, not crime. Where is the water? Everything else will be secondary to that. So Charles Warren says, not only do you need to know where the water is, but the water has to be accessible. Because if you're going to have to go every day back and forth, uphill, downhill, that's not so easy. And also, if I want to capture the city, I'm going to come here and say, wow, look at these big walls. I don't want to deal with the walls. What am I going to do? I'm going to go down to the spring, and I'm going to just camp out at the spring for a week, and this city is finished. So Charles Warren says all the fortifications built around the spring must have been built by the original inhabitants of the area of Jerusalem, which must have been by the spring itself. That's number one. Number two, Charles Warren knows this book, the Bible. Now, the Bible tells us for 3 centuries before David, nobody can capture this hilltop. This is a strongly, heavily fortified hilltop, a Canaanite stronghold. And yet David comes and says in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 8, whoever wants to strike at the Jebusite stronghold must capture the water channel. And Charles Warren says, there's no water channel in the old city of Jerusalem. There must be that this spring over here is what David was referring to. All the tunnels and fortifications built around the spring must have been built by the original inhabitants, the Canaanites, to protect the city, to protect the water. So he says this is the location of ancient Jerusalem. Except there's one problem. When Charles Warren announces his theory to the world, scholar and layman alike say, Charles, that is the most ridiculous theory we've ever heard. The question is why? Well, if you take a look here, this 11-acre ridge over here is the city of David today. Here's what it looks like 100 years ago. And so they say, Charles, you're telling us that this barren hillside, this is the Jerusalem that has significance to billions of people around the world? There's nothing here. It has to be the old city. And Charles Warren says, no, I'm telling you, this is the spot. Over the next 150 years, where we're standing right now, the city of David will become one of the most excavated sites in the world. The most excavated site in Israel, with British, French, German, Irish, American, and today Israeli archaeologists all excavating here and discovering that Charles Warren was in fact correct. That where we're standing right now in the city of David, outside the walls of the old city, is in fact the location of the original biblical city of Jerusalem. So to the north, we mentioned we have the Old City, Temple Mount. To the east, we have Mount of Olives. You've already visited Mount of Olives?
Not yet.
Not yet. Very quickly then, on one foot, what's the Mount of Olives? The Mount of Olives is the most significant Jewish cemetery anywhere in the world. Over 120,000 graves on the Mount of Olives. Now, one thing that Jews, Christians, and Muslims all have in common, one of the few, is the belief that when the end of days happens, the party is happening here. Now, who gets invited to the party and what happens to those who aren't invited, there's a slight disagreement. But according to Jewish tradition, one of the things that's going to happen is what's known as the resurrection. Who gets to come back first? All the people buried on the Mount of Olives. So these are people who are, I call, early adopters. They're buying into resurrection technology. They want to come back first when the Messiah comes, and so it's a big privilege to be able to be buried on the Mount of Olives. So that's what we have over here. What's ironic is there's a building atop the Mount of Olives. You know what that building is? Right atop, see the arches, 7 arches? That is a hotel. Now you might wonder, why would you build a hotel in the middle of a cemetery? So here is a very not pleasant answer. A sad answer, but a true answer. This hotel was built during the Jordanian occupation of Jerusalem between 1949 and 1967. Now, generally speaking, you find hotels, nice places, tourist attractions, beaches, things like that, places with nice views. Sadly enough, when the Jordanians were occupying Jerusalem between 1949 and 1967, they blew up every synagogue in the Old City. There was no access to the Western Wall, and they desecrated tens of thousands of graves on the Mount of Olives. For the Jordanians, you didn't have a better view in the world, because when you looked out of your window, whatever room you were staying in, all you saw surrounding you were dead Jews. And that's why they built the hotel where they did, right atop thousands of graves. And so that's what you have over there. To the south, we have the ridge of Harmon and Zeev. You see a building straight across, a white building with a blue flag. That is the United Nations headquarters in the Middle East. It's also the former seat of the British High Commissioner during the Mandate period. So that's what we have straight across from us. And then to the west, we have Mount Zion. Now, in the book of Psalms, Psalm 125 says, Yerushalayim Harim Saviva. Jerusalem is surrounded by mountains. That's beautiful, poetic. But why does David, 3,000 years ago, when he's writing the psalm, why does he write those words? Now, if you look around, well, you say to the north, you have Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount. To the east, you have the Mount of Olives. To the south, you have the ridge of Zeev. And to the west, you have Mount Zion. Jerusalem is surrounded by mountains. That's why David chooses those words. But up until about a century ago, when everyone believes that the old city is the original city of Jerusalem, then the words of the Bible, that Jerusalem is surrounded by mountains. It's poetry, it's Shakespeare, it's really beautiful, it just doesn't mean anything. It's only over the last century, through the excavations taking place here in the city of David, where we know the true location of ancient Jerusalem, where we see the words of the Bible coming to life. Why does the Bible say that Jerusalem is surrounded by mountains? Because it is. It's not just poetry. It's an actual topographical description of Jerusalem and how it's situated amongst the hills that surround it. One last thing, which I think is relevant to the people who I'm with right now. We just celebrated yesterday Jerusalem Day, 50 years since the liberation of Jerusalem. Now, oftentimes, what I do here in the city of David, I meet with people involved in shaping public opinion. Congressmen, senators, media, so on. Now, oftentimes, I'll ask them, when you think of Jerusalem, what are the places that make Jerusalem, Jerusalem, from a religious perspective, from a historic perspective? And inevitably, everyone gives the same answers. You have the Temple Mount, Western Wall, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Garden Tomb, the Garden of Gethsemane, the Church of Ascension, the Mount of Olives, the City of David. And I say, you know what all of those places have in common? I say to them, every single one of those places, every place that you see over here in this map, every single one of these places is in what, for the last 50 years, the world defines as East Jerusalem. Every place that makes Jerusalem, Jerusalem, for Christians and Jews, is located in East Jerusalem. And I can't tell you how many times members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, they say to me, wait a minute, we thought East Jerusalem was just a few Arab neighborhoods. Say, the Holy Basin, all the places, all these sites over here, this is all East Jerusalem. And they say, well then hold on, when people talk about dividing Jerusalem, well what would happen to these places? They say, well if you do a strict pre-June 1967 division of Jerusalem, everything you see here, the old city, everything you see here is on the other side. And you don't have to use your imagination to think about what would happen to all these holy places. Just look at what ISIS is doing. Just look at the destruction of antiquities on the Temple Mount in the late 90s at the hands of the Muslim Waqf. In the last 2,000 years, the only time that there's been freedom of access for all people to all the holy sites has been over the last 50 years. Now, as I say to them, and I'll say to you, I'm not here to talk about policy. You all have your own opinions, and that's great. But it's important that people understand, when people use the terminology East Jerusalem, understand what it's including. It's including everything that makes Jerusalem, Jerusalem, to everybody standing over here right now. During the time of Nehemiah, when Nehemiah comes back to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And what we're going to be doing, you can see all these seats that are being put in over here. Starting in another month or two, at night, we're going to be doing a video mapping on the walls and stones that Nehemiah built around Jerusalem, the story of the return to Zion during the time of Nehemiah. So that's going to be the newest thing that's going to be happening. Literally, the screen will be the stones. Nehemiah's stones telling the movie version of Nehemiah's story. We just came from the palace excavation, and we had to move our visitor center. So we said, well, where can we put our new visitor center? So we looked for a spot where we could potentially build something, and we came here to what's known as the Givati parking lot. Now you might say, well, why would you name an archaeological excavation after a parking lot? Except if you came here about 10 years ago, you would have seen here, it's a parking lot. So our foundation comes and says, well, let's purchase the parking lot and build our visitor center over here. Except obviously in Jerusalem, nothing is as simple as you would like it to be. And so what happens is, before we can build, the Antiquities Authority comes and says, let's put ground penetrating radar on the floor of the parking lot, and let's see what we uncover. And the seal, to be interesting, it has to have two things on it. The seal has to have a name, and it has to have a name that period Jerusalem. This was in the New York Times, it was with the Prime Minister, but it doesn't have a name that we know from the Bible. So the question is, 2004. Southern end of the city of David. We're standing right over here right now. 2004, southern end of the city of David, there's a road over here. Beneath the road, there is a sewage pipe. The sewage pipe explodes. Big mess. The municipality has to send in construction crews to go and repair the pipe. Now, Jerusalem is not just any other municipality. So here, in this area, certainly, when you have to send in the construction crews, you also send in archaeologist, because you just never know what's going to turn up. So they're doing their work, repairing the sewage pipe, and the archaeologist, he starts to hear some scraping and scratching from the bulldozer. It just doesn't sound right. He says, "Get everyone out, stop what you're doing," clears them out. Turns out that inadvertently, in repairing the sewage pipe, they had uncovered these ancient stone steps, 2,000 years old, from the time of King Herod. And the archaeologist said, well, hold on, there's only one other place in the whole country where you have steps like these, and these are the steps over here. The steps leading up to the southern ascent of the Temple Mount. So the archaeologist said, well, there must be a connection between these two sets of stairs. Both 3,000 years old, both from the time of King Herod, both likely part of the temple infrastructure. So the question is, well, what are these steps down here? So the archaeologist said, these are the steps that led into the Temple Mount, up to the temple. These steps must have led down to the ancient pool of Siloam. Now, what is the pool of Siloam? Right? If you're up with your Christian scriptures, you might be familiar with one of the most famous miracles attributed, which is the healing of the blind man. Right? Where did the healing of the blind man take place? In the pool of Siloam. Where's the pool of Siloam? The city of David. Right? In the Bible, it talks about there are 3 times a year. You mentioned next week is Pentecost, Shavuot. Right? It's one of the pilgrimage festivals where all of Israel would have to go on pilgrimage up to the Temple Mount, up to the temple. But before you can go to the temple, what do you have to have happen? You have to purify yourself. You have to go to a mikvah, a ritual bath. Josephus says that 2,000 years ago you would have had up to 1 million pilgrims going on pilgrimage. Now, that's a lot of people who have to go swimming, right? The pool of Siloam was the size of 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools, right? To accommodate the hundreds of thousands of people. So then the archaeologist said, hold on, if here's the pool over here, and here's the temple on the Temple Mount up here, how did all these hundreds of thousands of pilgrims get from here to here? So they widened the excavation. What do they find when they widen the excavation? What do you think they find? They find the steps, the pilgrimage road, the road that our ancestors walked on 2,000 years ago when they went on pilgrimage. And I say our ancestors because whether you're Jewish or Christian, 2,000 years ago, your ancestors literally walked on these very stones. This road is being literally excavated as we speak. A very significant portion of that excavation is being announced literally right now by the Israel Antiquities Authority with some different antiquities that have been discovered along the road. And in a few years, you're going to be able to start off by the Pool of Siloam and literally walk on the very same steps that your ancestors did, going to the very same place that your ancestors did. Now, just to put it into context, there are many places in this country where you could say this biblical event happened. Say, take the Ela Valley, where David fought Goliath. We could say, here's where the Israelite camp was. Here's most likely where the Philistine camp was. And here's where David likely stood, and here's where Goliath likely stood. Except, none of those people are there anymore. You have to use a lot of imagination, right? This will be one of the few places where you can literally go and literally do the very same thing that your ancestors did in the same way, in the same place, on the same stones. It's very physical, real, you can touch it. There are shops, you see the remnants of shops and homes alongside the pilgrimage road where somebody would have stopped to maybe get something on the way up to the temple. It's all there. Beneath the pilgrimage road, which is being excavated as we speak, archaeologists uncovered a drainage channel that ran the full length of the pilgrimage road. This drainage channel has been fully excavated. And what we're going to do is we're going to walk through a small portion of that channel. The whole channel is about 2,000 feet. The road is about 2,000 feet from the pool of the Temple Mount. We're going to walk about 300, 400 feet in this drainage channel. I can tell you, I've gotten, I don't know if you're into sports, Pau Gasol, who used to be the center for the Lakers. He's a big guy. I've gotten him through here. I've gotten football players through here. So it's a little tight, but on the other hand, I've gotten bigger people than all of you through here. So unless you're acutely claustrophobic, we should be okay here.
I can handle it.
You'll go in front.
I've been through it once.
This is the base of the pilgrimage road, above our heads. We are walking through the drainage channel beneath it. So here's the road, here's where we are down over here, walking through this. Now you might wonder, both of these are 2,000 years old, King Herod's time. You might wonder, why are we walking through a 2,000-year-old sewer? Right? There's a good answer to that question, but you have to wait until we get to the end. Okay? This would have held water 2,500 years ago. There would have been someone living above our heads. They would have lowered a jug down here, filled it up with water, pulled it back up. Except, what do we see here? 2,000 years ago, Herod comes along and says that this drainage channel this cistern is in the way of my drainage channel. So what does he do? Cuts open one side, cuts open the other side, and now it's no longer a cistern, but it's been incorporated into the drainage channel project. So now, let's go back a couple of years and see what has been discovered inside this cistern. Right? So, first, we find here this small golden bell.
In this cistern?
Down here in this drainage channel. Right now, the Bible tells us there was a very special person who wore special garments. And on the hem of those garments were small golden bells. Who is this person? It's the high priest. Right? The high priest who was likely walking somewhere along the pilgrimage road above our heads. His robe caught, tore, and then the bell slipped off and was found down here inside the drainage channel. Now, what does this look like?
The menorah.
The menorah. This is the earliest etching of a menorah that's ever been discovered. It was found down here, 2,000 years old etching of a menorah. But if you look at it, there's only 5 branches. Archaeologists believe that perhaps this was etched by a child. When the archaeologists began excavating the pilgrimage road, they found something strange. They found, a crack in the pavement. And so first they thought, well, this must be an ancient pothole. But then they looked, and they saw every few feet there were additional identical cracks in the pavement, always in the same spot. It was done intentionally, and they couldn't understand why. So they looked to the writings of the historian Josephus. And Josephus says that 2,000 years ago, the Romans are destroying Jerusalem. The temple is in flames. And the last Jews of Jerusalem seek refuge from the Romans where? In a drainage channel located beneath the pilgrimage road. Right over here, where we're walking right now. The Romans find out about it. And they come with sledgehammers. And they break open the pavement. And they find 2,000 Jews hiding there. Archaeologists find whole cooking pots, meaning the Jews were living there, maybe for days, for weeks, for months. So the Romans find them, and Josephus says, kill all 2,000 Jews they find hiding there, the last Jews of Jerusalem in the year 70. Archaeologists find this Roman sword and scabbard, presumably used by some Roman legionnaire to kill the last Jews of Jerusalem. Now, oftentimes, I'll have delegations like yourselves, and I'll say, I know why Christians are called Christians. It's fairly obvious. But why are Jews called Jews? Jew is a funny word. What does Jew even mean? In the year 70, the Romans destroy Jerusalem, and they destroy this country. And to commemorate the victory 1 year later, the Roman Emperor Vespasian mints a coin. Here's Vespasian, and he mints this coin with a Roman legionnaire standing above a Jewish woman on her knees crying. On the coin it says, Judea capta. Judea has been captured, or defeated, conquered. This victory coin was minted by the Romans more than any other victory coin, as if they were more proud of their victory over little Judea than they were over all their other victories. The name of the country was Judea. Jews come from Judea. Yehudim come from Yehuda. If you go to Rome today, you have the Arch of Titus. Now Titus would later become emperor of Rome, but this wasn't built for what Titus did as emperor. This was built for what Titus did when he was commander of the 10th Roman Legion, which was responsible for the destruction of Jerusalem. On the arch itself, you can see the temple treasures, the menorah being carried off into exile. Now, in the years leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem, from 66 to 70 CE, there was a period known as the Great Revolt, the Great Jewish Revolt for freedom against the Roman occupation. And each year of the revolt, the Jews minted small bronze coins. Except scholars have long wondered, why were they minting these coins? Because the coins themselves at that time had no monetary value. And if the Jews really wanted to fight the Romans, why not use the metal to make weapons? Why waste it on a worthless currency? So I want to share with you an answer that I heard, that I find to be meaningful. But before I do, I want to show you one such coin. Now this coin that I'm going to show you is 2,000 years old. And on one side of the coin, you have the year. Year 1, Year 2, year 3, or year 4 of the Great Revolt. This is a year 2 coin corresponding to 67, 68 of the Common Era. On the other side of the coin, it has an ancient Hebrew writing, the words, the Cherut Zion, for the freedom of Zion. Zion, of course, being another name for Jerusalem. Now, why are they minting these coins? Take a look at this. It's an original. Why are they minting these coins? So an answer that I heard, which I find to be meaningful, is that the Jews of Jerusalem likely knew that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed. But they also believed that one day in the future, their descendants would return and find these coins and know what their ancestors both lived and died for a free Jerusalem. Now they probably thought, like the Babylonian exile, talking about a couple of years, a few decades, maybe a century, they couldn't imagine it would be nearly 2,000 years before the Jewish people would return as sovereign to Jerusalem. But eventually we did, and in 1958, 10 years after the reestablishment of the Jewish state of Israel, Israel mints its first national medallion. Except, there's something very strange about this medallion, because if you look closely, what they've minted was the Roman Judea-Copta coin. Now, why would Israel, with its very first national medallion, remint a symbol of shame for Israel? In order to answer that question, you have to turn over the medallion. And when you do, it will no longer say Judea-Copta. The Roman legionnaire will no longer be standing there. In its place, it says, Israel liberata. Israel's been liberated. The Jewish woman is no longer on her knees crying, but standing tall, proudly holding in her arms a newborn child. Beside her is a man working the land, making the desert bloom. This was Israel's response to Rome, 2,000 years in the making. The Western Wall, the Wailing Wall. When you go to the Western Wall Prayer Plaza, when you go there, you're about 4 stories above where we're standing right now. Right? These are the very first stones. Now, when you go to the Western Wall and you see the stones, how do the stones look? Flat, smooth. When you come here and see a stone like this, how does this stone make it into the Western Wall? Where's quality control, right? Where's someone forgot to work this stone. What happened here? Now, there's a very simple answer. Nobody was ever meant to see this stone. Even when the temple was standing 2,000 years ago on the Temple Mount, this would have been underground. This is foundation level. Just like today, you build a home, you build a building, there's a certain percentage that you just don't see. But then you'll say, okay, that's fine, but then what about this stone? Clearly, somebody worked this stone, so why did this stone get worked and not this one?
And this one too.
And this one too, right? So Josephus says that there were about 20,000 people who worked on the expansion of the Herodian Temple Mount. Among them, stonemasons. Now imagine you want a job as a stonemason. You're going to come with your resume, your LinkedIn profile, and the foreman here says 2,000 years ago, I don't know what that is. But here's a hammer and here's a chisel. Why don't you show me that you know how to work a stone? Except he's not going to let you work upstairs where if you're not good, you're going to mess up the project. He's going to let you come down here, foundation level, where you're good or not good, it doesn't matter because nobody's going to see it. Now the person who works this stone got a job. The person who worked this stone and cut off the bottom corner went home. But either way, nobody was going to see these stones. Then you may have noticed all of a sudden there was an arched ceiling above our heads. What happened? Why the sharp turn? So, we were, a few moments ago, literally just on the other side of that wall. Had we kept going straight, what would have happened? We would have gone beneath the Temple Mount. When Herod is engineering the drainage channel, when he gets up to the point of the Temple Mount, what does he do? He curves the drainage channel to go around it. He puts the arched ceiling to give extra support to make sure that everything is sturdy by the Temple Mount. Which means what? This stone right over here is the southwestern cornerstone of the Temple Mount. If you look over, there's nothing past that. This is the very first one. Which means there's a 1 in 4 chance that this is the very first cornerstone of the entire Temple Mount, and a 1 in 2 chance that this is the very first cornerstone of the Western Wall itself.
Because the cornerstone has to be laid.
Right?
Why are these stones longer? They seem the same height, but why are they longer?
If you look, it's interesting that in the stones, whether it's over here or in the Western Wall tunnels, they're all different shapes and sizes. It could be just the way the stones were cut, that some came out bigger and smaller, but there's stones that are even up to about 500 tons in weight. I mean, some stones are just enormous. But you can see also there's no mortar between the stones here, the way it's built, one stone right atop the other. And they're still here, right? This is impressive even by today's standards, let alone a couple of thousand years ago. But the cornerstone of the Western Wall.
That's amazing.
And above us is this arch. This would have been one of the main entryways up into the Temple Mount some 2,000 years ago. You can see alongside us here the remnants of shops that line the pilgrimage road that you would have gotten your last minute purchases before going up into the temple. And you can see the destruction, the stones cast off by the Romans in the year 70 when they destroyed Jerusalem. You can see the pavement broken over here. So this was the destruction of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago.
And they haven't been moved.
They haven't been moved.
Still in place.
Right? And I'll end off with one last story, and then we will say goodbye for now. So this stone over here, this is the southwestern capstone of the Temple Mount, the upper cornerstone. More than 2,000 years old, and if you look closely, you can see over here there is Hebrew script, ancient Hebrew writing. Now I brought my children here not too long ago, and I asked them, I said, what does this say? And my daughter Hodaya, who's 12, my other daughter Eliana, who's 9, they said, well, Abba, Dad, it says, Lebeit Hatkiya, to the trumpeter's house. Now, what does that mean, trumpeter's house? Trumpeter's house, we know that some 2,000 years ago, during the time of the temple, there would have been a priest standing up on top at the corner, and on the Sabbath eve, the priest, when it got close to the beginning of the Sabbath, would blow a trumpet, telling the shoppers and the shopkeepers, the Sabbath is coming, last minute purchases, get ready to go home and accept the Sabbath. Now when I brought my children here and they read this, I was very proud. I was proud, first, thank God my children could read, but I was proud for another reason. I thought to myself, how many nations, how many peoples can go back more than 2,000 years and read the writing of their ancestors, speak the same language as their ancestors, worship the same God, have the same festivals, customs, and traditions as their ancestors? I said, my children can, the Jewish people can, we can say that. Many people believe that why are we here? We're here because of the Holocaust, because of persecution, because of anti-Semitism. And yet you have a stone like this, the coins, the seals, which tell a different story. The story that says we're here because this is where we've been for thousands of years. And by extension, the connection that Christianity feels to Jerusalem, extending from the very same sources of the Bible. And so I want to end off with two blessings. The first blessing is the blessing that's traditionally said on Passover and on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, which is L'Shana Haba'ah B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem.
Amen.
There's a lot that we've seen today, but there's even more that we haven't seen today, and there's even more than that that is still waiting to be uncovered. 2/3 of the city of David has yet to be excavated, which means that there is even more that's still going to be found in the future, and it'll be my privilege when you come back if I can share some of those things with you. The second blessing I want to give to you is if you think about the person who maybe worked this stone, maybe with the person who minted the coin that we saw earlier, 2,000 years ago, for them to imagine that 2,000 years later, people would still be talking about their craftsmanship, something that they created and brought into the world. And the blessing I have for all of us is that may the work that we do here in the short time that we're in this world, may it not just impact our families, our communities, our countries, and the world while we're alive, but may it impact and resonate for generations and generations afterwards.
Amen.